Hey, Joyce here. Today we want to talk about hacking workplace conflict. Now, can't cover everything about conflict because there's so many different varieties and so many different types of conflict. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on types of conflict, primarily in small to medium-sized businesses, although many of these things would apply to large organizations as well. We'll talk about different tools that you can use when you're in conflict. We'll relate the conflict to each one of the profiles and defenses, and then also I'll give a lot of stories from my past in hopes that that will bring it alive. But it's really important that you get something in your own mind about a stress in your life, and as we go through, try to relate it to a conflict in your life and jot down anything that you might think is good for you. And don't forget, this is going to be a stream video, but you can pause at any time, rewind, and just go at your own pace. So here's a slide with all my street cred. I'm an executive, a mom, I'm a survivor, but I think the most important thing to note is I've walked in your shoes. And I found it very difficult that I had a persona at home or when I was in group type things, on a personal level, volunteering or whatever, and I thought I had to have a very different persona at work. And that caused a lot of conflict for me, internal conflict. And I hate conflict. So I've worked a lot on this topic of conflict because it drives me crazy to be in conflict and not to feel that I can be proud of the way I handled a difficult situation. So it's important to realize all the costs of conflict. On a personal level, conflict really costs the individual. It can lead to, not feeling fulfilled, to being unhappy. It's just not a nice place to be. Most people don't like conflict, but it's also a huge cost to the manager or to the employer or to the company, because when people are in conflict and they're unhappy, they tend to increase absenteeism. They decrease productivity. If there's someone that you don't like to work with or for, you're going to decrease your productivity and avoid that person potentially. And finally, turnover. Turnover is one of the most expensive things for a company. If you have a good employee, by the time you get them trained and indoctrinated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to have them leave because of conflict, and there's always going to be some conflict, but because they don't feel that the company has a corporate culture that tries to deal with conflict in a healthy way, as often as possible, they're going to leave. And eventually you're going to lose a good person. I read somewhere recently that they estimate that the turnover of one employee costs about 33% of their salary. Personally, being in a small company to a medium-sized company, I would say it's 10 times that, because you might have a period of time where there's no one in the position. You have to hire. That takes a long time. Finding good people is difficult. I would say it costs far more than that. Never mind the time you waste or have to invest hiring a new person, getting a new person trained, getting them to feel like they're part of the team, getting them, if they work with customers, having them build that rapport with customers. Turnover is just incredibly expensive in these times. So as we go through this discussion of conflict, I want you to think about a conflict in your own life. Don't pick anything too hard. Don't pick like sickness in your family or anything really, really difficult for you. Try to pick something that's more of an everyday conflict, things that you see at work, something that's not life-threatening, nothing too serious. Pick an everyday conflict. And as we go through, I'll encourage you to see, well, what relates to your conflict? Because, again, I can't cover all the conflicts, but I want you to relate it to something that's important in your life. So we're going to break conflict down into 5 basic groups. The first one is called Interdependency Conflict. And that's where you have a job to do, where you are dependent on someone else doing their job properly in order for your job to be successful, or vice versa. Someone is dependent on you doing your job in order for them to do their job. So I want to start with a scenario, and this happened years ago in my career, but it was a very significant conflict. And the backstory is that I was the CFO or the VP of finance, one or the other, operations. And then there was the CEO, and this person happened to be from Europe, which kind of adds a little flavor to it. And there was the VP of sales for North America. Now, what happened was, we're a software company. Every year, any of our customers had to renew their support and maintenance contracts. Not to get into too much detail, but just to understand the backdrop. If a customer had bought 1,000 licenses and then halfway through the year they bought 500 licenses, what would happen is at the end of the year on their annual renewal date, we would need to prorate the cost. So, for the 1,000 licenses, they'd play a full year, and for the 500 licenses, it only plays 6 months, for example. And so that was the responsibility of the VP of sales. He was responsible for all revenue in North America. So what would happen is, I would get the deals that he had processed. So he would already have gotten the purchase order and all the signed agreements, et cetera, and it would get to the end of the line, which was me, and I'd review the deal, and I'd either release it or not, bring it back if there were issues. And so what was happening is, this particular calculation is a little bit difficult. And so the deals would get all the way to me, and they would have been calculated incorrectly. So I go to my boss, who was the CEO, and I say, hey, this one's not calculated properly, and he sends me over to the VP of sales to sort it out. So the VP of sales goes, what do you want me to do? Purchase order is already in. He wasn't bad, he wasn't malicious, he's just like, I'm not going to go back and get another PO, like, what do you want me to do? So what happened in the one or two instances is the CEO would say, okay, it's immaterial, it's small, just pass. Just let it go. It was a few $100s or $1,000. So then we got one, but I kept going back to the VP of sales and like, we have to get these calculations right and whatever. And I was getting stuck on the other end. So I went to him on one deal, and this particular one was a very large deal. And so the impact on revenue, they were invoicing the customer about $10,000 less than what they should have been invoicing. So again, the three of us, we had this little triangle. I say, okay, this is now off by 10 grand. And the VP of sales says, what do you want me to do? I already have the PO. This PO took me 90 days to get. We've already been through contracts. If I push this back, we may lose the deal altogether. And of course, it's the end of the quarter or the end of the month. The deal is really important. We're a subsidiary of a foreign parent, so we had goals we had to meet in order to stay in business. And so it came back, and I go to the CEO, and he goes, yeah, you're going to have to pass. So here I was doing my due diligence, I'm bringing it up, and I felt every time I was being overridden by the CEO. So this one, it was very large, and so he says, let it go, talks to the VP of sales, and he goes, just let it go. And then he says to me, hey, and after they pay, could you go back to your contact at the company and fix it? So not only were they not following the procedure in sales, and I was, bringing it up and getting kind of put back down by the CEO who was always overriding me, then here I am, I'm going to have to clean up the mess as well. So that's the backdrop. So you can see it's all interdependencies here, all these interdependencies going on. Okay, so I've set the scene. Now, what do? I've been overridden. I have to go fix and clean up the mess. And so what I did is I used a tool called the pause button. I wish I could say that I was doing it with grace and dignity and professionalism. I really hit the pause button out of anger and frustration that I wasn't getting anywhere with this. And so I hit the pause button, meaning I'm not going to go any further, knowing that I'm in my defense, I'm ready for a fight, I can do no good here. And so I hit the pause button, I accepted what the CEO had to say, and then I just let it go. So the reason I hit the pause button was because I knew I was what I call fighting with reality. This is a term I found when I did a lot of work with Byron Katie, who has a website out there called The Work, and she deals with all these kind of things. But in a nutshell, this is what was happening in my world, but I thought it should be something different. And so I'm fighting with reality and losing. So this is a tool you can use all the time. This particular course is about conflict, but this happens all the time when we're fighting with reality. And that's a really good thing to become aware of when your world is showing up like this, but you believe it should be another way. And so this, just be aware when you are fighting with reality, which is what I was doing. So now I want to talk about a tool or a group of tools called expansion tools. These are really important when you're fighting with reality or when you feel stuck or any time like that. And basically, it's ways of getting bigger than the problem or expanded bigger than the problem so the problem seems smaller. Now, I wish I could tell you that I did this on purpose, but I'm kind of telling this story in arrears. So what happened was, I'm a big walker. I love to walk outside. And one day I'm walking along and I realize, geez, I'm spending all this time making these calculations of support at the end of the process, finding mistakes, and then fighting and then having spend all the time to clean it up. My time and my team's time. So I had this idea, what if I volunteered to do the calculations in advance for the VP of sales? So I'd hand him all the calculations, hand him everything that him and his team needed. I would probably spend less time. I would definitely have less aggravation if I did it up in front. He had everything he needed, and so what I would actually like type up the emails, create the proposals, everything. I would give them everything all done, tied up in a little bow, so that him and his team could just go out and work with the customer based on the rapport they had built just to bring the deal in. So I'm like, I'm gonna propose this and see how it goes. So by going outside and walking and coming up with this really fresh idea, basically what I was doing, and I wasn't out there walking saying, oh, I need to come up with a solution. I just was walking in an expanded way, and this idea just came to me. But this idea, it's not just being in an expanded space. This is actually drawing upon some of the core strengths of my profile. Now, if you go on the website, there's all kinds of stuff about profiles, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in a moment. But one of my strong profiles is knowledgeable achiever. And a knowledgeable achiever can look at a problem kind of from 100 feet up and see how it might fit together better. It's just how my mind works. I may not be great at cooking, or I may not be great at science. Well, not science, but like technologies. But I'm really good at looking at a puzzle and saying, this isn't working, but if we put it here, it would work great. So I relied or I used the strengths of my profile in my little puzzle pieces, and I came up with this incredible solution, and I presented it to the VP of sales. Of course, he was thrilled because he didn't like doing it. His team didn't like doing it. And, that the CEO is like, whatever works. He's like, if you two agree, he was fine with it. So I wish I could say that when I went and talked to the VP of sales and the CEO, I was all like, oh, this is wonderful. Actually, I was pretty resentful. I was not super happy about the fact that I had to make the change when I had done nothing wrong. I was in what you would call my rule keeper defense. So there's all defenses. We'll go through them in a bit. But really, I was doing it, but I was doing it a bit begrudgingly. But I had to really think, do I want to be right or do I want to be impactful? Now, I'm not sure I actually thought that deeply about it way back then, but I can look back on it now and say, well, even if it was just to the level of, I'm going to do something to make my life easier, I really did make a huge impact on the company. And since then, I have used this many, many times because I really, really like to be right. But I don't want to be right at the expense of doing the thing that's the best for the company. I'm definitely a company girl. I'm definitely a team player. I want the company to succeed. And so I was willing to kind of put my ego aside in order to be impactful. Now, as it turns out, I am now the VP of Sales' new best friend because, first of all, I saved him from what came out was they hated doing this. They hated doing the calculations. They didn't feel confident about it at all. It wasn't their skill set, whereas it was the skill set of me and my team. Secondly, they were actually missing a lot of the renewals. Like when I did it, I set up a whole system and I had everyone had a renewal date and it was all organized. And so they didn't miss, the revenue went up significantly because we were getting all of them and they weren't being missed. And so this VP of sales, now I'm helping him. His actual revenues are going up. He's meeting his quotas. His team's happy. Everyone's happy. So now when I needed his team to pass their expense reports in on time, something that we may have fought about in the past or had to push and nag, now he's my new best friend. Well, you did that for me, so I'm going to do that for you. So it actually built a lot of rapport and relationship capital between me and the VP of sales. I mean, the VP of sales was a really nice guy. We generally got along well. But this made it really concrete where I'm going to help him do his job. He helps me do my job. Now, CEO is ecstatic because revenues went up. The team's looking good. Everything's, it's happening easier. Revenues went up. And so now whenever he goes to make one of these decisions, I started becoming his eyes and ears. And he'd bounce things off me. What do you think about this choice? What do you think about this choice? Because I looked at it from a very different perspective. And he saw my puzzle-making skills. Now, he didn't agree with every suggestion that I had, but he'd pass a lot of things by me because I could take the idea and in my mind have it all implemented in all the problems we might have for the next 3 years, how it would flow through the company operationally. So by eating my ego a little and really doing what was best for the company, I made it. There was a big turning point there, and I was hugely impactful, and that same impactfulness lasted for years to come. So now I want you to go back to the conflict that I had you think of at the beginning, your conflict, and I want you to think about, is this an interdependency conflict? So the first thing is, here's my conflict. What type of conflict is it? Does this fit with your conflict? Secondly, were there any tools in this section where you said, wow, I like that tool? This isn't an interdependency conflict that you have in mind, but I like the tool. Jot those down, because the most important thing about the tools I'm going to share with you is that doing them, no matter what you apply them to, whether it's conflict or other things in your world, doing them over and over and over really is where you get the most bang for the buck. Because what happens is if you do it once or twice, it might change something in the particular situation, but as you do it over and over and over, you're actually changing behaviors. And so jot down, is your conflict that you have in your mind, is that interdependency, number one? And two, what tools do you like? Because if you like it, you're more likely to do it day in and day out. So the second type of scenario that causes conflict in the workplace would be work style differences. Now, what I mean by this is pretty easily explained with an example. So if I have a project to do and it's due in 2 weeks' time, I'll probably do some of the research in the first 3 or 4 days. I'll start to gather things together. I'll start to pull together some sort of solution, and then maybe do my PowerPoints towards the end, and so that I can present it to someone else. I would rarely, very, very rarely, be doing the project the night before. I mean, I might be putting little touches, but if I'm doing it the night before, it stresses me out, and when I'm stressed, I'm less creative. So I do things over a period of time. Now, my youngest son, he just loves to work under a harsh deadline. So if it's due on Tuesday, he's finishing up Monday night at like midnight, or maybe Tuesday morning, depending on when it's due. He just loves that energy of doing things at the last minute. Now picture that in the workplace. If this is someone working for me and I'm saying, how's it going, how's it going, how's it going, and they've done nothing on the project up until the night before, that causes conflict. Or vice versa. Someone like him, if he was managing me, and well, what about this, and what about this, and da-da-da-da-da, he would look at that as inefficient. So work style differences do cause a lot of conflict in the workplace. So when I have a conflict with someone else, because we have differences in work style, what I try to do is a tool called put myself in their shoes. And basically, I try to really understand their point of view. Now, this is something I don't know where I learned it. I've done it since I was a little kid. Whenever there was anything going on, any kind of conflict, I could always see both sides. My side and the other person's side, or if it's two other people, if the conflict was with me, the other two people. I just have always done it. Now, this is a great tool to use in the workplace because if you're able to make the case for the other person's point of view, so, I am Republican and someone else is Democrat, or vice versa, and so you have a disagreement about, maybe I shouldn't use the president because it's too contentious right now, but say you believe in one thing and someone else believes in something else. What I would do is I would say, okay, make the case for the other person's point of view. That really, you own their point of view and you really try and see it from their perspective. Now, you can use this at work. I have tried to have people that, say there were two people in conflict that were on my team, or someone from my team and someone from another team that had to work together that were in conflict, and I would suggest that they do that. It's tricky because it's not easy. And usually, if someone's in conflict, that level of conflict at work, they don't want to hear someone else's point of view. They don't want to see it from someone else's perspective. So another way, if you're the manager, is you can guide them in that direction. So, like, for example, someone may come to me. So say the conflict is between someone on my team and someone on another team. And they come to me and say, well, all the different things that are wrong, this person is doing wrong, or whatever. I'll go, I wonder why they're doing that. Like, that seems difficult. That seems like the hardest way to do it. Why would they do that rather than this? And I guide them in a way so that they can start to think about the other person's point of view. But if you get people that are game to try this, or if you want to use it on yourself, it is an incredible way to try to find a middle ground because you're trying to understand really what is bugging them most. So let's go back to the scenario that I described earlier, where the CEO is overriding me so that he can recognize this revenue from the VP of sales. So if I put myself in his shoes, what decision would I make? Honestly, I would have made the same decision as him. I would have done the same thing because ultimately we're a subsidiary, we needed to make our numbers, we were always under the microscope, and going back to a customer and returning a PO and asking for a different one, such bad form. You know what I mean? Because we had made, as a company, we had made the mistake in the first place. We had given them the wrong numbers. So I have to say, I would have made the same decision as he made. And so by putting myself in his shoes, it helped me to kind of bring my ego and the anger down a little bit so that I could be open to having a better and more creative solution. So a lot of the work style differences can be explained by our profile and our defense. Now, I don't know if you've taken any of the other courses or looked on the website, but there's tons of stuff about profiles and defenses. Now, I'm going to go through this 5 profiles and 5 defenses, and I'm going to go through them very quickly now as it relates to conflict, just to give you an idea. But if you wanted to go a little bit deeper, there's videos for each profile, how to get them out of defense, for example. So the first one is charismatic leader in their core, enforcer in their defense, or there's 2 flavors of this one, charmer in their core and manipulator in their defense. So let's go back to the scenario. In the scenario, the CEO was definitely a charismatic leader. Now, were they in their core? They had a tough decision to make. They had to choose between 2 employees that they really liked and valued. But were they enforcing? That wasn't my impression. I wasn't happy because I wanted him to take my side. I kind of felt like he didn't support me in this public type of scenario. But that I would have done differently than him. I would have taken the person aside and said, listen, you did what you were supposed to do. Sorry, I had to override you, but it was for the good of the company. Like, I would have softened the blow. But were they in their core? I would say yes. Now, the salesperson, they were more of a charmer manipulator. Now, were they in their core? Well, a charmer manipulator, they just kind of maneuver through life, and it all kind of goes a certain way. I would say that the first time or the second time that I had brought this issue to them, they were probably in their core, like, what do you want me to do? That was in their core. But I think that by the time we got to the third, fourth, and fifth time that this particular thing had happened, they were really in their defense. They were manipulating a situation because they knew, I don't think they intentionally did it wrong, but when they did it wrong, they knew that ultimately they would have the CEO would back them. So were they manipulating? In my opinion, yes, they were manipulating. So here's, this is the first profile in defense, charismatic leader, enforcer, and how it would play out in that particular scenario. So now think about your scenario. Were you a charismatic leader or enforcer? Were you in your core? Were you in your defense? Was the other person that you're in conflict with, were they a charismatic leader or enforcer, charmer, manipulator? It starts to go. So once you pick out what type of conflict it is, start to break down the players into how they fit and what is their motivation. And are they in their core and are they in their defense? Okay, so continuing on with workplace differences, this is the second profile, which is knowledgeable achiever. And the most common defense for knowledgeable achiever would be rule keeper. Now, in this scenario that we're going to play through, I was the knowledgeable achiever / rule keeper. These are the rules. This is how you calculate it. I've trained you 10 times. You should do it this way. This is the process. Rule keeper. When I took a step back and went into the core of knowledgeable achiever, I was able to look at the puzzle, put the pieces of the puzzle in differently, and come up with an incredibly creative, efficient solution to what seemed to be an impossible problem, an impossible conflict. And the company benefited at the same time. One thing I should point out is that I am going to go through the profiles and defenses as pairs, but as a knowledgeable achiever, I can also have poor me which is one of the ones we haven't done yet. I might have poor me as a defense. So any of the 5 profiles can be paired with any of the 5 defenses. These are just the most common ones. Okay, the third profile, again, we're talking about work style differences. The third profile is called the team player, and the most common defense is called people pleaser. So let's take that same situation, and let's assume for a moment that instead of being a knowledgeable achiever, let's assume I was a team player. Now, team players hate conflict. I don't like conflict as a knowledgeable achiever, charismatic leader, but team players literally hate it. They want everyone to get along. They want the team to work as a team. They're an incredibly great asset in any company because they're all about making everybody happy, which has the side benefit of longevity and people not leaving and people not turning over because they make everybody really happy. But their defense is people pleaser. So if this situation, if I was a team player people pleaser, what I probably would have done is never even brought this to the CEO. I would have just done whatever this VP of sales wanted me to do. People please, people please, people please. Because I wouldn't have wanted the conflict. I wouldn't have wanted to call him out. I wouldn't have wanted to put the CEO in a difficult situation. So work style differences, if I was a team player, we may never have come to the really good solution we came to because I would never have done that. Now, just so you know, it might sound great. Oh yeah, I want a people pleaser because that serves my purpose. They're not going to fight me. They're going to give me everything I want. The problem with people pleasers is they tend to burn out, a lot of absenteeism, and then eventually they'll just quit because they can't handle it. They'll just leave. You won't even know. They'll just resign without giving you even the opportunity to try and solve it. So workplace conflict as far as work style, people pleasers are nice. It's nice to have someone that will do anything I ask them to do, but be careful. There's a huge downside to taking advantage of that. Okay, so continuing on with work-style differences, the next profile is called Creative Idealist. The fourth profile is called Creative Idealist, and the defense is called Thinker. Now, Thinker doesn't sound like a bad word, but it's associated more with dissociation, meaning the Creative Idealist is brilliant. They're always bringing down all these awesome ideas, but when they go into defense, they dissociate. You can tell because, they're not going to make eye contact with you. They tend to be very fearful. So that's, when I say thinker, it's kind of in a negative connotation. That's the defense. So again, we're going to go back to the same situation. Let's assume I was a creative idealist. Although you're not going to find many creative idealists that are CFOs or operations. That's not really where they tend to be. They tend to be more like software developers or engineers. So, but let's assume for a moment that I'm a creative idealist and this conflict happened. Well, I would never bring this into the triangle. I would have just dissociated. I would be afraid of both the CEO and the VP of sales because their personalities would make me so nervous because they're so strong energy. So I probably would just be in my office and not even tell anyone anything's wrong because I couldn't do it. That would be too hard for me. I would dissociate rather than come into conflict with anyone. So if you have a creative idealist on your team, one thing I would suggest is never be aggressive with them. If you want the best out of the people on your team, if you want to bring out their absolute best and what's best for the company, try to make them feel safe. Fear is their nemesis, so yelling at them, you're not going to get anywhere with that. And in general, with defenses, just so that never call someone out on their defense. So you never call an enforcer an enforcer. You would never call a knowledgeable achiever a rule keeper. Or you would never call a creative idealist a thinker. Because if you call someone out on their defense, all you're going to do is push them further into their defense. Now, the fifth profile is called Emotional Intelligence Specialist, and the defense is poor me. Now, unfortunately, you're not going to see many of these in the workplace because the true emotional intelligence specialist would find a competitive, hard-driving workplace like that just too painful to be in. More often you'll see them as kindergarten teachers or therapists or somewhere where they're there for you 100%. But just so we can go through all the profiles, let's assume for a moment that we're the same situation and I'm in EIS and this conflict is happening, I'm in this job. I would probably just melt down in tears rather than deal with anything. And so that is very difficult in the workplace because it's so hard. What do I do with that? What do I do with someone crying in front of me? You feel terrible. So if you have an EIS that works for you, one of the really important things to do is to say, I can see this is really hard for you, that this is really bothersome, that this is really making you unhappy. And start from there. Instead of calling them out on their defense, relate to their defense. Because these feelers, they would be an incredibly great asset in a business because they're going to understand how your customer feels. They're going to understand how your client might feel. Much more so than some of the other profiles. But again, they're not in the workplace very often because it's too harsh. But if you have someone on your team that's an EIS, Emotional Intelligence Specialist, or poor me, just be a little bit kinder. Again, if you say, stop being so emotional, you're just going to push them further into their emotions. Be kind. Be compassionate that they actually really feel this way. Okay, so we're coming down to the end of the work style differences, this section. And so I want you to, again, think about your conflict, the one that is bothering you right now. And is this a work style conflict or not? And look at all the players and see what is your profile and your defense in this scenario. What is their profile and their defense in this scenario? That's really going to help you to figure out pieces of the puzzle to try and solve this conflict. So the third type of workplace conflict is what they call leadership conflicts. Now, this is more for small to medium-sized businesses. Again, I think all these things can be applied to large businesses as well. But the most common is when there's two founders of an organization and they have very different styles. And what happens is one ends up being mom, one ends up being dad, and everyone in the company either associates with one or the other. Which one do they work best? So if I work best with this founder style, I'll gravitate that way, and vice versa. Now, this is very harmful to an organization. So if you have this situation, you want to be really careful that the founders realize that this is, cutting their company in half and is very divisive to a successful organization. So that's one type of leadership conflict. Number two, what if you have dotted lines? Now, this one I've always had because I work in operations. And so I'll have a direct line to the CEO, but I'll have dotted lines to all kinds of people in the organization because I'm supporting them, to do their jobs. So what happens when you have a conflict? So you have this priority over here, but then another manager who also gives you work, there's a different one over here. And that kind of conflict. Finally, you can have one manager who gives you conflicting priorities. It's not a great leadership style, especially if they don't appreciate that you're a human and you can only do one thing at a time and you can only have one deadline due today at a certain time. So that's kind of a description of the third type of conflict called leadership conflicts. So I want to give you a tool for how to deal with leadership conflicts. And it's called Dig, 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 or basically ask tons of questions. Now, this is difficult because typically the conflicts are coming from people who you are subordinate to, either directly, indirectly, or maybe you're 3 levels down from the founder. And these are the type of things that are happening to you. And so it's really difficult to question, and because you're kind of questioning their authority. So if you have a valid conflict because of these types of situations, my suggestion is you ask very valid questions and try not to have any resistance. So for example, you don't want to be saying, well, how am I supposed to do that if I'm doing this? Okay, so that's a snarky attitude kind of question. So you're asking a question, but it's not going to get you anywhere. That's just going to put the other person in their defense. And typically, they outrank you. So what you can do is to say, wow, this is awesome. Okay, I'm working on this for so-and-so, and it's due by 5 o'clock today. Or maybe, like in my case, all right, these tax returns are due by 5 o'clock today. Like, no question, have to be at the post office. And that's a non-negotiable. So how does this rank compared to that? Is it possible to push this off? And they may say, no, you have to get that done today by 5 o'clock as well. All right, totally get it, totally understand that it's a priority. So can you get me help? Because if you can get me some help to do these 3 things, then I can just manage this, put a minimal amount of time here, have other people do that, maybe get someone to run to the post office for me, or get someone to do all of the copying or the printing or whatever. And then I can do your priority as well. So try to just be reasonable and, again, see it from, put yourself in their shoes. They need this by 5 o'clock, a proposal that needs to go out to a customer. So you are going to have conflicting priorities, but try to work with them so that you're doing it in a reasonable way and trying to come out to the best solution and get both things done. Or maybe they say, you know what, get this done by 5. As long as you get it done first thing in the morning, will be fine. So really come at it in a considered way and put yourself in their shoes so you can ask questions that don't come across as snarky or snide or opinion or negative, because again, they're going to just push harder. So in my company, I'm lucky because we have something called a Cooperative Framework. And that is basically our how do we work together, or our employee manual. Now, we had a very legalistic, structured employee manual. And then we had this terrible experience where we were trying to hire this woman, and we were at the very end of the process, and we just sent her the employee manual, didn't really think that much of it, and she refused to work for us. And she refused the job and walked away. I mean, this is like everything else was negotiated. She wouldn't work for us because of the employee manual. She didn't want to work in a company that had that type of culture that was so punitive and legalistic. Now, there's laws in the country about how we work together. There's human resources laws, there's payroll laws, there's all kinds of types of things like that. So you have to have something. So my boss, God love him, created this thing called a Cooperative Framework, and it's basically how we work together. And it is a considered and well thought out document. It's fair. It's not top heavy where the executives get away with whatever they want. It is how we work together. And the reason it's called Cooperative Framework is because it's based on the concepts that you would find in a co-op, that type of organization, even though we're not a co-op, we're a regular C Corp. So what has happened is I lucked out, and I've worked there for about 22 years now. I work for a boss who has the same viewpoint as I do. Now, we have completely different styles about how we implement it, but at the core, we believe in the same types of things. And so that is just embedded in our corporate culture. And so if you can start to actually document how you work together, like this cooperative framework, it is amazing, because then you can just say, oh, you two have a conflict? The first step is you two go in a room, a conference room, and try and talk it out. That's the first step. And why not? Let's allow our employees to be adults and to resolve the conflicts themselves. And I usually encourage, especially if one of the people is on my team, encourage them to have put themselves in the other person's shoes, try to understand things from their perspective. Because if each person goes in with their heels dug into the ground and they're not going to budge, they're never going to resolve the conflict. So I guess I should have said this at the beginning of the course, but you really need to have an intent that you want to resolve conflict, because it's really easy to perpetuate conflict. It's really easy to dig in your heels. It's a lot harder to say, no, that's not how I want to work. Conflict happens, we deal with it. We don't let it fester. We deal with it, and then we move on. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is when an employee, now keep in mind, we're still under the category of leadership conflicts caused by leadership. And so oftentimes the employee doesn't feel comfortable coming to you and telling you what the problem is. And so these are really dangerous, because these fester the most out of anything. You can have a toxic employee on your team and you don't even know it. And really, the reason they do come to you is because there's been the invitation, hey, if there's ever a problem, come to me. And so a lot of people say that, but then you go to them and that's not how they treat it. They get very defensive. So you have to say, okay, if there's a problem, come to me. And when they come to you, no matter how hard it is for you, try to stay in your core, try to listen, treat them with respect. You don't have to give them everything they want, but you just have to treat them with respect and build that trust. So I have people on my team that I know don't come to me when they have problems, which is unfortunate, newer people. But I'll tell you, the people that have been with me a long time, we just goof around about it. Like, someone will be, getting all defensive, and I'll be like, don't you be so sassy. And we laugh. And they can do the same thing to me. They can call me sassy. So building that trust, building that rapport is so important, because the last thing you want is someone to not come to you because they're in fear for their job or in fear for your reaction. So in order to keep this from happening, put out the invitation. You can always come to me. And when they come to you, treat them with respect. So the next lens I want to put this through, leadership conflict, is when the leader actually initiates the conflict, or maybe better yet, initiates a contentious conversation. So say I have someone working for me and I generally really like them, they're doing a great job, but there's something I need to talk to them about. I'll tell you, I wish I could say I'm this expert on conflict. I messed this up just last week. I would say I did a mediocre job of handling this. What I didn't do was I didn't say, hey, you're doing a great job, I'm so impressed, da-da-da-da-da. There's this one small thing that I need to talk to you about. I didn't do that. I just went in and started talking about the thing. And they, like, oh, I don't like to be micromanaged. They immediately went into their defense. Even though it's something they were told to do, they said they would do it, they just weren't doing it. So, but I wish I would handle it differently. So when I have to initiate a contentious conversation, one great way to do it is to paint the big picture first and then say, but I really need help here. And then if you keep asking and they won't do it, another way to handle it is, what's the road? Why is this so hard? What's the roadblock? What am I not seeing here? Because you're a great employee. Why would you not do this one thing I keep saying I need? So you really have to play this one really carefully. I have to say this is one of my least favorite kinds of conflict because I know I started. So be really prepared, like, what is the conflict? Know as much as you can about the details and the data points. What is their profile? What is their most common defense? And make sure you're presenting it in a way that they can hear it. Like, for example, if it's a creative idealist, I'm not going to yell at them because then they're not going to hear a word I say. They've dissociated. I'm not going, if it's a charismatic leader with an enforcer defense, I am not going to go, face them and, because they're warriors. That's what they want. They like a little battle. So really be cognizant when you have to initiate the difficult conversation, when you are initiating something that has a high probability of becoming a conflict. Be really considered before you have that conversation. And sometimes, one last little tip, sometimes if there's something going on, I wait till the next day so that I sleep on it. The anger or the frustration or whatever, tends to dissipate, and so I can come at it in a much more level-headed way. So as we come back to the end of this leadership conflict section, which is the third types of conflict, I just wanted to remind you to think about your conflict. And is this a leadership type conflict, or maybe one of the other ones that we've already talked about? And have you heard any tools in this section that you want to jot down? Because, like I said, pick the ones, cherry pick the ones you like, because the more you do them, the more they have an impact. So the next type of conflict we're going to call personality conflicts and personality clashes. So these are similar to work style clashes. There's some overlap there, but I gave it its own category because you can have you can work together just fine, but you don't like each other as people. So this is kind of a subset. They're just not your favorite person. So since personality clashes are very similar to work style clashes, go back and relook at all the core profiles and all the defenses, because everything I said in that section applies to this section as well. Which one of the 5 profiles are you? Which one of 5 profiles are they? What is your most common defense? What is their most common defense? Because as you try to tease out a personality conflict, the profiles work in almost the same way as we discussed for the work style conflict. So if you have a personality conflict with another employee, one of the best tools I can suggest is what's called walking meetings. Now, earlier I talked about expansion tools, and one of my favorite expansion tools is walking, for me personally. But that also works with when you're in conflict with someone else. And you have these walking meetings, and preferably you have them outside. So what happens is when you exercise, when there's any kind of movement like that, it's well documented that it reduces stress, it increases creativity, it just is a much better platform, much more expansive. They've actually done research that says that when you walk and you put pressure, when your foot hits the ground and has that pressure, that it increases the blood flow to your brain, which I never knew. They used to think that the blood flow to your brain was an involuntary type of thing, but you can impact it by walking. Now the second thing is all of these benefits of walking and exercise get ramped up when you're outside, because when you're outside, nature triggers parts of your brain that are that are in charge of relaxation and reduction of stress and everything. So you kind of get in the double whammy where you are walking, and so you're getting all the positive, you're venting out the stress, you're opening up, you're more creative, and doing it outside ramps that up even more. They're doing all kinds of studies on that now. So if you have a personality conflict with someone, a great way to try to work on it is to ask them if they want to go for a walk at lunch. Go for a walk. Get to know them in a place where they're more expanded and you're more expanded. They're less stressed, more relaxed, same with you, and more creative. You're both in a more creative place, more open to different ideas. So if you have a personality conflict, go for a walk. It's so simple and so effective. And as an aside, walking meetings are also really good if you're working on a corporate project and you want to have creative solutions. My boss and I, we've worked together for years. I can't tell you how often we have walking meetings. As long we only don't have walking meetings if something has to be written down. And sometimes we just bring little pieces of paper and pens. It's such a good way to do the annual planning because you're just more open, you're more expanded, and you're more creative. So try it with your personality conflicts. You might be surprised that it makes the encounter so much easier because you're putting it in the best possible environment. So I'm going to bring up this tool again called Dig, 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 basically asking questions. If you have a personality conflict with someone, a great way to clear the air and build rapport is through questions. So I was giving this particular presentation to a group about a month ago, and the woman asked me, well, how can I apply this? I have a conflict with this person, they're remote, we're never in the same building, everything is remote, and I'm having a really hard time. And how she presented it to me was, she says, she's in her core, but he's not. Now, between you and I, anyone who says, I'm in my core, but you're not, usually is not in their core. But that's okay. We'll give her the benefit of the doubt. So I said, so they have a conflict. I said, have you asked them questions? And it just stopped her dead in her tracks because she said no. I said, get on, ask them questions. Why do they need this? What is the problem? How can we make this easier? Don't be snarky. It's not, what's your problem? It's nice questions, rapport building questions. And it really stopped her in her tracks because she was saying something. She was, expressing outward, and so was he. And no one was listening to anyone. So if you ask a question and you genuinely listen, because you genuinely want to resolve this conflict, and you genuinely listen and you ask questions and keep asking and ask detailed questions, building rapport. I was in Ireland about 2 months ago at my company. The parent is in Ireland, and we had a speaker in for our annual meeting, and one of the exercises he did that my group loved the most was an exercise in vulnerability. And basically, vulnerability helps to build trust and helps to build rapport. It makes you just more human. And so think of that this way. If you're having a personality conflict and you want to build rapport, ask questions. Be vulnerable. Because if you're in your defense and they're in their defense, you're not going to get anywhere. You're just going to butt heads. Whereas if you come at it from a different perspective, ask questions, be genuine, truly care about the answers, truly care that you're able to resolve this thing, you might be amazed at the difference. So the next tool I want to share is one you can use anytime, but it's really good for personality conflicts. And that is, you ask yourself the question, in a quiet moment, not when you're in direct conflict with the person, but later on, you're sitting in a more relaxed way and you say, where am I that? So what this means is, if you're saying, well, that person always does this, and that person is difficult, and that person never puts their stuff in on time, and that person, and you're pointing the finger at another person, ask the question, where am I that? Where are you being difficult? When are you not passing your stuff in on time? So in psychology, there's a whole study of projection, or as my mom used to say, and her mom, my grandmother, you see your own faults in others. That's what this is about. Sometimes what we hate in another person, or really bugs us in another person, is a quality that we have in ourselves. Or it can be, I vow never to be like that. So it can go either way. But I usually I don't want to face it in myself. So I start with, where am I that? And it may not be a prevalent quality of mine, but it is rare that I don't eventually find a scenario in which I do that. So for example, maybe at work I always turn my stuff in on time and I always return my phone calls and da-da-da-da-da. But maybe when, in my personal life somewhere, I don't. I blow people off, I never called that person back, I'll get to it later. So when you start to really pay attention to your life and be the observer, my favorite tool, be the observer, you'll see that somewhere you're probably doing it yourself. And so the person is really giving you a gift because they've gotten this big red arrow. If you hate this in me, look for it in yourself because maybe there's a piece that you just aren't seeing in yourself. And it would be nice to clear that out. Have you ever had a scenario where you're looking at something and someone else is looking at the same thing and you have completely opposite opinion about what's happening? Just like this slide. If you look at 6 one way, it's a 6. If you look at it from the other direction, it's a 9. So one tool you can use is, and this is kind of a catch-all, if you're in conflict with someone, you say, wow, that's an interesting point of view. Okay? Now, this does a couple things. First of all, you can't be snarky. None of these you can be snarky. Because if you say, well, that's an interesting point of view, you idiot, that's not going to get you anywhere. So an interesting point of view points out to the person you're speaking with that that's just their opinion. There's lots of opinions. A lot of people feel that their opinions are actually facts. It blows my mind that they think that what they're saying is a black and white fact. So interesting point of view softens it a little bit. There's a kindness to it if you do it without any snarkiness. And it basically says to the person, that's your opinion. And you've planted that seed. Now, fair play also shows to you that the way you're looking at it is also just an opinion. And maybe you need to soften that a little bit because a lot of things we have in our lives we think are facts when they're really not. If you grew up in a different country or you had different parents, whatever, they're not facts. So if you're really thinking about their statement as a point of view and your statement as a point of view, there's much more chance that you're going to meet somewhere in the middle. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the personality conflict section. So go back, think about the conflict that you want to resolve, and decide, is it a personality conflict? Is this the type of conflict that it is? And did you see any tools in this section that you think you might want to try? So now we have come to the 5th category or type of conflict, and it's called cultural-based dissension. Now, these are really hardcore differences. It's not a personality conflict, it's not a profile difference, it's not a work style difference, not a leadership difference. It's that you fundamentally believe that things should be a certain way, and someone else thinks they fundamentally should be another way. Almost like your belief system or what you believe in for God, or it's really hardcore. This is much more about right and wrong. And so the best way I have seen this described and resolved is a Heineken of all places, a Heineken commercial. So I'm gonna pause for a moment and I'm gonna share with you this Heineken commercial.
I would describe my political views as the new right.
I'd say that I'm left.
Feminism today is man-hating.
I would describe myself as a feminist, 100%.
I don't believe that climate change exists. We're not taking enough action on climate change.
I think it's about time these people got off their high horse and started looking for credible problems that actually exist.
It's absolutely critical that trans people have their own voice.
That's not right. You can't, you know, you're a man, be a man, or you're a female, be a female.
Women do need to remember that we need you to have our children.
Could I be friends with someone that says a woman's place is in the home?
Right, OK, well, I'm an expert at flat packs. If you've any trouble, just watch me.
So it looks like I've got your instructions here.
I think so.
Let me help you.
Let's have just that bit there.
Describe what it is like to be you in 5 adjectives.
Okay, frustrating.
Dedicated.
Opinionated.
Lucky.
Ambitious.
Offensive.
Solemn. I have ups and downs.
Strong.
I want to say attacked, misunderstood.
Name 3 things you and I have in common.
We're both male, we're both confident, and we're both loudly spoken.
We know each other better than people who've known each other for 10 minutes should.
You seem quite ambitious and positive, and you've got this really, got a glow. Do you know what I'm saying? Your aura's pretty cool.
I'm sensing, are you former military or something?
People have said that, but there is no,
Really?
there is no history. So are you then ex-military?
Yeah.
If you're ex-military, I'm very proud of you already.
Well,
So
I grew up in a bit of a rough state. I've experienced homelessness. I've known what it's like to have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely most grateful just for life.
We've only just met, but I think you're the sort of person that would listen to me and we'd have a discussion rather than argue.
Yeah, you could hang out with, man.
let's go. Mind your hands.
Goodness sake.
You're right, mate.
Fitter than I look.
Perfecto.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I think we just built a bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you are. Each take a bottle and place it on its corresponding markings on the bar.
Attention, please now stand to watch a short film.
Feminism today is definitely an excuse for misandry, man-hating.
If somebody said to me that climate change is destroying the world, then I'd say that is total piffle.
So transgender, it is very odd. We're not set up to understand or see things like that.
I am a daughter, a wife. I am transgender.
I feel like the battle for feminism definitely isn't done. The fight is never going to be over, if I'm honest with you.
You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer.
I'm only joking.
You're happy for a second then.
Well, I'm having a drink.
I'm having a drink.
Yeah.
I want to discuss.
Beer.
Yeah, beer and discuss.
Cheers.
At the end of the day, mate,
About
I've
reaching
enjoyed
out to
working with
people,
you.
yeah. And, you know, even if you wanted to convince people about your point, the productive thing to do would be to sit down and have a
Just
beer.
engage.
I've been brought up in a way where everything's black and white, but life isn't black and white.
Yeah, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Smash the patriarchy.
I'll give you my mobile number, you give me yours, and we'll keep in touch. I'd have to tell my girlfriend that I'll be texting another girl. She might be a bit upset with that, but I'll have to get round that.
I'll have to tell my girl that
She'll have to lump it.
Okay, so I give kudos to Heineken. I thought that commercial was amazing. I've shared it with so many people because I just can't believe how incredible it was. And it is real. These people really do believe that there is or isn't global warming. One of the other conflicts was, males versus female dominance. The other one was transgender. So if you look at those cultural differences, in my opinion, those are way more hardcore than the normal cultural differences you're going to see in the workplace. For example, the first story I told you, I told you there was a European CEO So his views of the world were very different than American views of the world. I now work in an Irish company. Again, different again. They are very soft, they're very kind. It's just a very nice culture. I've also worked in a subsidiary of an Israeli firm. And they had, again, a totally different culture. And they had, even to the extent of their concept of personal space was so much smaller. Like, so say you normally stand in a workplace setting, you normally stand a couple feet away from a person. Well, the Israeli culture, you stand way closer. And it's like, when you first work in it, it's really off-putting. So this section is about culturally based differences. If you look at the commercial, the advantage that they have is that they were asked to work together on a project, building something together, before they ever realized that they had really fundamental belief systems that were wildly different. And I don't know how we do that in the workplace, but if you can, try to get to know, if you have a cultural difference with someone, try to wipe the slate clean somehow. Is it possible to look at them with fresh eyes? And I don't know, if you look at this commercial, to me, it makes that all possible. And that, sometimes I have the rose-colored glasses, but if they could do it, I have never been in a situation, a cultural difference, conflict type situation, that was anywhere near as dramatic as that. So if they can do it, I can do it. Maybe you can do it. So even though I do think that commercial kind of sums it all up, I wanted to have one more slide about cultural-based differences. And that is about programming. Now, when you're born, your parents start to train you. And that is your first exposure to being programmed. And then you might get programmed at your church or your neighborhood or in your community or at school or your life experiences. So we don't question what our parents and our society tell us until we start to get a little bit older. So that programming is brought to a person before they have any way of filtering it. And a lot of our habits and things are actually programmed in our brain using neural pathways, like the automatic responses that we have. I've spent a lot of time working on what about me is programmed, and really starting to question it. And there's a whole nother course on limiting beliefs and assumptions where we get into that. But I just wanted to point it out in a very cursory way, how these culturally based differences are really based on the programming that we had at a young age. And you can say, well, they're wrong and I'm right. But it's just where they were born. They just happened to be born in the culture, into that family. My parents were born in the 1930s. I brought up very Irish Catholic, very old school. In my family, the boys had a college account and the girls had a winning account. So when I went to college, I lived at home and commuted and paid for it myself, because that's not what my parents believed. Now, I grew up, I'm not that old. Like a lot of my friends, girls, women, they all lived away at school. I didn't, because that's how I was brought up. That was my personal programming. And so when you're trying to work out a cultural difference, if that commercial didn't do it for you, also just be a little sympathetic to that's how they were brought up. It's almost like, a child that didn't know any better. And I'm not saying they didn't know any better. It's that you have had two different sets of programming that are just opposites. So think about your conflict and categorize it. Was it interdependency? Was it work style? Was it leadership? Was it personality? Or maybe cultural dissension? Pick a category. Then for each of the players in the conflict, sometimes it's just two. What is their core profile and what defense are they presenting? And really start to pull it down. And then pick one, just one, maybe two tools, and try to use them with the person that you're having this conflict with. And so that brings us through all the slides we've done so far, and then I'll give you a couple more hints. Okay, so as you start to apply this to your conflict, I mean, come on, you cannot get away for a course with me without me using the tool, establish the observer. Establishing the observer, basically all you're trying to do is to recognize and watch the behaviors that you already have in place. What is your profile when you're in conflict? What is your defense when you're in conflict? It's just about observation. So the first step, as you go to apply this stuff, is just observe how it is working today. Or you can think back to scenarios that have happened in the recent past and say, well, in here this was happening, here this was happening. So you establish the observer and you start to think how, just be conscious of your own behaviors. I have this saying, a habit is a choice that we make when we're not paying attention. Well, that's what this is about. This is about paying attention. That it's not just a habit. I'm going to really dissect how I'm behaving and how these things are playing out. The other thing you can use this for is continuously establish the observer, because you're going to find that, wow, that's a conflict I've had with this person for 5 years, and geez, I handled it a lot better this time. So it's another way to be conscious of the progress that you're making as well. Okay, so once you start to identify, you've established the observer, you start to identify patterns that you have that are common in conflict for you. So if you look at all the different conflicts in your life, this is a common pattern. And then choose someone, start to pay attention to how someone else is handling it. So for example, I might be in a situation that's driving me crazy, that this person, like I'm in a meeting or whatever, and this person's behavior is driving me crazy. And someone else in the room, calm as a cucumber, handles it perfectly, and I go, wow, how can that not drive you crazy? And sometimes I'll hear afterwards, well, yeah, it did bother me, but, I just wanted to get to this other point, and it, so I just let that all go. And so what I've done is I've created these mentors in my mind. This isn't creepy. I'm not stalking anyone. I just watch other people's behaviors. So once I identified where my most common points of conflict were, I watched people who I thought handled that type of conflict well. And sometimes it's about how they handle it, and sometimes it's about the phrases that they use, the terminology that they use, how they diffuse a situation. So pay attention not only to your own behavior, but pay attention to the observer on other people and find mentors. And I never had just one mentor. I thought this person did this very well and this person did that very well. And so I kind of conglomerated them in my own mind. And they didn't even know they were my mentors. But follow someone else's behavior. Find someone who you admire, how they handle these conflicts, and start to emulate that behavior. Okay, so now we're going to do some advanced work. And I wish I could tell you this is a story about me. It isn't. It's a story about someone else. And this person loved conflict. So let me tell you the story. So I was working with a woman who managed and owned and managed a retail establishment. And she had her main person who took care of the day-to-days of the retail portion of the store. And this store, among the many other things they did all the printing and printed materials for weddings. So you've all heard about Bridezilla and Monster-in-Law, Mother of the Brides. It's just a stressful time. And there's, people come in and they're all worked up. So this woman, the woman I was working with said, oh, I could not live without the person that runs the front area. She loves it when people come in and they're angry, pissed off, frustrated, and have a big issue. I'm like, what? I gotta meet this woman. Now, I've only met this woman once, but she's getting a whole story in these slides because she, as a mentor to me, she impacted me more than anyone else when it comes to conflict. So here I am, expecting this kind of big bruiser of a person. This woman was so tiny and just so thin. She was probably 100 pounds soaking wet, seemed very meek She loved it when people came in pissed off because she knew that she could turn around the situation. She knew she could diffuse it and make the person happy. And that was her superpower. And she knew she could do it, and she just did it all the time to the point where she had 100% confidence that she could turn situations around. I went, wow. Here, she's so tiny. The physicalness of it made such an impact. She was the strongest person in the room. This teeny tiny little woman who knew that she could handle anyone when they were in their defense, anyone when they were angry. And I went, wow, can I learn from this person? And she comes to mind a lot when I'm struggling in a conflict or with a personality I have a hard time with. Like, how can I even think that way? How do I think? Or how do I even have the creativity to turn that situation around? She inspires me. I'm not to her level, but she inspires me. It gives me a goal to reach for. So this is the last slide. I just want to end with another tool. It's basically, when you're in a conflict, a question that you can ask yourself. And that is, so everything's going crazy, there's a conflict, tempers are flaring, or you're upset, or whatever, and to take a step back and say, how is this the best thing that could have happened? Now, that does a few things. It actually helps you to expand bigger than the problem, which we've talked about a few times. A few different tools do that. But I'll tell you, I want to go back to the first scenario that we started with. So don't forget, I'm the CFO, we had the CEO, and we had the VP of sales. We're a really difficult conflict for me at the time. We resolved it. And I will tell you that the entire trajectory of my career changed when I solved that problem. Because that CEO never made major decisions without coming to me. There's this thing in accounting, especially with CFOs, that some CFOs are these instrumental, members of the management team, and others are not given a seat at the table. I will tell you that I've never, since then, not had a seat at the table, because I was not viewed as a bean counter. I was viewed as a problem solver with great math skills. So I can look at that situation now and know that it was probably one of the best gifts of my career, that conflict. I didn't know it at the time. But once that happens to you, what you can do is, when I have a conflict today, I can go, okay, how is this the best thing that ever happened? And usually it's about personal development or whatever. Like, this happened so young in my career that it really changed the trajectory. So instead of just being a CFO, I went into operations, and now I take care of finance as well as customer success, which directly relates back to this problem. The problem that the scenario at the beginning of the slides, because I started to do all of the revenue, the follow-on revenue for customers. And so now I run customer success. So I run the whole shebang. Everything from the time a customer signs on the dotted line, my team take care of. They deploy the software, we renew hosting or extensions and support. We sell them additional licenses if they grow. We support them to be successful. Now, that would never have happened had I said to the VP of sales, no, you have to do it this way. It was that conflict that brought me to where I am in my career right now. And I love where I am in my career. So when you have a conflict, try to look at it and say, why is this the best thing that's happening? Rather than, oh my God, another conflict, I hate conflict, and try to put up defenses. Be open. How is this the best thing that could have happened?